Chinese Magic by Algernon Blackwood. Part 1. Dr. Owen Francis felt a sudden wave of pleasure and admiration sweep over him as he saw her enter the room. He was in the act of going out. In fact, he had already said goodbye to his hostess, glad to make his escape from the chattering throng, when the tall and graceful young woman glided past him. Her carriage was superb. She had black eyes with a twinkling happiness in them. Her mouth was exquisite. Round her neck, in spite of the warm afternoon, she wore a soft thing of fur or feathers, and as she brushed by to shake the hand he had just shaken himself, the tail of this touched his very cheek. Their eyes met fair and square. He felt as though her eyes also touched him. Changing his mind, he lingered another 10 minutes, chatting with various ladies he did not in the least remember, but who remembered him. He did not, of course, desire to exchange banalities with these other ladies, yet did so gallantly enough. If they found him absent-minded, they excused him since he was the famous mental specialist whom everybody was proud to know. And all the time, his eyes never left the tall, graceful figure that allured him almost to the point of casting a spell upon him. His first impression deepened as he watched. He was aware of excitement, curiosity, longing. There was a touch even of exaltation in him. Yet he took no steps to seek the introduction which was easily enough procurable. He checked himself, if with an effort. Several times their eyes met across the crowded room. He dared to believe, he felt instinctively, that his interest was returned. Indeed, it was more than instinct, for she was certainly aware of his presence, and he even caught her indicating him to a woman she spoke with, and evidently asking who he was. Once he half bowed, and once, in spite of himself, he went so far as to smile. And there came, he was sure, a faint, delicious brightening of the eyes in answer. There was, he fancied, a look of yearning in the face. The young woman charmed him inexpressibly. The very way she moved delighted him. Yet at last he slipped out of the room without a word, without an introduction, without even knowing her name. He chose his moment when her back was turned. It was characteristic of him. For Owen Francis had ever regarded marriage, for himself at least, as a disaster that could be avoided. He was in love with his work, and his work was necessary to humanity. Others might perpetuate the race, but he must heal it. He had come to regard love as the bait wherewith nature lays her trap to fulfill her own ends. A man in love was a man enjoying a delusion, a deluded man. In his case, and he was nearing 45, the theory had worked admirably, and the dangerous exception that proved it had as yet not troubled him. It's come at last. I do believe, he thought to himself as he walked home, a new tumultuous emotion in his blood. The exception quite possibly has come at last. I wonder. And it seemed he said it to the tall, graceful figure by his side, who turned up dark eyes smilingly to meet his own, and whose lips repeated softly his last 2 words, I wonder. The experience, being new to him, was baffling. A part of his nature, long dormant, received the authentic thrill that pertains actually to youth. He was a man of chaste, abstemious custom. The reaction was vehement. That dormant part of him became obstreperous. He thought of his age, his appearance, his prospects. He looked 38. He was not unhandsome. His position was secure, even remarkable. That gorgeous young woman, he called her gorgeous, haunted him. Never could he forget that face, those eyes. It was extraordinary. He had left her there unspoken to, unknown, when an introduction would have been the simplest thing in the world. But it still is, he replied. And the reflection filled his being with a flood of joy. He checked himself again. Not so easily as established habit routed. He felt instinctively that, at last, he had met his mate. If he followed it up, he was a man in love, a lost man enjoying a delusion. A deluded man. But the way she had looked at him, that air of intuitive invitation, which not even the sweetest modesty could conceal. He felt an immense confidence in himself. Also, he felt oddly sure of her. The presence of that following figure, already precious, came with him into his house, even into his study at the back where he sat over a number of letters by the open window. The pathetic little London garden showed its pitiful patch. The lilac had faded, but a smell of roses entered. The sun was just behind the buildings opposite, and the garden lay soft and warm in summer shadows. He read and tossed aside the letters. One only interested him, from Edward Fark, whose journey to China had interrupted a friendship of long standing. Edward Fark's work on Eastern art and philosophy, on Chinese painting and Chinese thought in particular, had made its mark. He was an authority. He was to be back about this time, and his friend smiled with pleasure. "Dear old unpractical dreamer, as I used to call him," he mused. "He's a success, anyhow." And as he mused, the presence that sat beside him came a little closer, yet at the same time faded. Not that he forgot her, that was impossible, but that just before opening the letter from his friend, he had come to a decision. He had definitely made up his mind to seek acquaintance. The reality replaced the remembered substitute. "As the newspapers may have warned you," ran the familiar and kinky writing, "I am back in England after what the scribes term my 10 years of exile in Cathay. I have taken a little house in Hampstead for 6 months, and am just settling in. Come to us tomorrow night and let me prove it to you. Come to dinner. We shall have much to say. We both are 10 years wiser. You know how glad I shall be to see my old-time critic and disparager, but let me add frankly that I want to ask you a few professional, or rather, technical questions. So prepare yourself to come as doctor and as friend. I am writing, as the paper said truthfully, a treatise on Chinese thought. But, don't shy, it is about Chinese magic that I want your technical advice." The last 2 words were substituted for professional wisdom, which had been crossed out, and the benefit of your vast experience. "So come, old friend, come quickly and come hungry. I'll feed your body as you shall feed my mind. Yours, Edward Fark. P.S. The coming of a friend from a far-off land, is not this true joy?" Dr. Francis laid down the letter with a pleased anticipatory chuckle, and it was the touch in the final sentence that amused him. In spite of being an authority, Fark was clearly the same fanciful, poetic dreamer as of old. He quoted Confucius as in other days. The firm but kinky writing had not altered either. The only sign of novelty he noticed was the use of scented paper, for a faint and pungent aroma clung to the big quarto sheet. A Chinese habit, doubtless, he decided, sniffing it with a puzzled air of disapproval. Yet it had nothing in common with the scented sachets some ladies use too lavishly, so that even the air of the street is polluted by their passing for a dozen yards. He was familiar with every kind of perfumed notepaper used in London, Paris, and Constantinople. This one was difficult. It was delicate and penetrating for all its faintness, pleasurable too. He rather liked it, and while annoyed that he could not name it, he sniffed at the letter several times as though it were a flower. "I'll go," he decided at once, and wrote an acceptance then and there. He went out and posted it. He meant to prolong his walk into the park, taking his chief preoccupation, the face, the eyes, the figure, with him. Already he was composing the note of inquiry to Mrs. Malleson, his hostess of the tea party, the note whose willing answer should give him the name, the address, the means of introduction he had now determined to secure. He visualized that note of inquiry, seeing it in his mind's eye, only, for some odd reason, he saw the kinky writing of Fark instead of his own more elegant script. Association of ideas and emotions readily explained this. 2 new and unexpected interests had entered his life on the same day, and within half an hour of each other. What he could not so readily explain, however, was that 2 words in his friend's ridiculous letter, and in that kinky writing, stood out sharply from the rest. As he slipped his envelope into the mouth of the red pillar box, they shone vividly in his mind. These 2 words were Chinese magic. Part 2. It was the warmth of his friend's invitation as much as his own state of inward excitement that decided him suddenly to anticipate his visit by 24 hours. It would clear his judgment and help his mind if he spent the evening at Hampstead rather than alone with his own thoughts. A dose of China, he thought with a smile, will do me good. Edward won't mind. I'll telephone. He left the park soon after 6 o'clock and acted upon his impulse. The connection was bad. The wire buzzed and popped and crackled. Talk was difficult. He did not hear properly. The professor had not yet come in, apparently. Francis said he would come up anyhow on the chance. "Very pleased," said the voice in his ear as he rang off. Going into his study, he drafted the note that should result in the introduction that was now, it appeared, the chief object of his life. The way this woman with the black, twinkling eyes obsessed him was, he admitted it with joy, extraordinary. The draft he put in his pocket, intending to rewrite it next morning, and all the way up to Hampstead Heath, the gracious figure glided silently beside him. The eyes were ever present. His cheek still glowed where the feather boa had touched his skin. Edward Fark remained in the background. In fact, it was on the very doorstep, having rung the bell, that Francis realized he must pull himself together. "I've come to see old Fark," he reminded himself, with a smile. "I've got to be interested in him and his, and probably, for an hour or two, to talk Chinese." When the door opened noiselessly, and he saw facing him, with a grin of celestial welcome on his yellow face, a Chinaman. "Oh," he said with a start. He had not expected a Chinese servant. "Very pleased," the man bowed him in. Dr. Francis stared round him with astonishment he could not conceal. A great golden idol faced him in the hall, its gleaming visage blazing out of a sort of miniature golden palanquin, with a grin, half dignified, half cruel. Fully double human size, it blocked the way, looking so lifelike that it might have moved to meet him without too great a shock to what seemed possible. It rested on a throne with 4 massive legs, carved, the doctor saw, with serpents, dragons, and mythical monsters generally. Rounded on every side were other things in keeping. Name them he could not. Describe them he did not try. He summed them up in one word: China. Pictures, weapons, cloths and tapestries, bells, gongs, and figures of every sort and kind imaginable. Being ignorant of Chinese matters, Dr. Francis stood and looked about him in a mental state of some confusion. He had the feeling that he had entered a Chinese temple, for there was a faint smell of incense hanging about the house that was, to say the least, un-English. Nothing English, in fact, was visible at all. The matting on the floor, the swinging curtains of bamboo beads that replaced the customary doors, the silk draperies and pictured cushions, the bronze and ivory, the screens hung with fantastic embroideries, everything was Chinese. Hampstead vanished from his thoughts. The very lamps were in keeping, the ancient lacquered furniture as well. The value of what he saw, an expert could have told him, was considerable. "You like?" queried the voice at his side. He had forgotten the servant. He turned sharply. "Very much. It's wonderfully done," he said. "Makes you feel at home, John, eh?" he added tactfully with a smile, and was going to ask how long all this preparation had taken, when a voice sounded on the stairs beyond. It was a voice he knew, a note of hearty welcome in its deep notes. The coming of a friend from a far-off land, even from Harley Street. "Is not this true joy?" he heard, and the next minute was shaking the hand of his old and valued friend. The intimacy between them had always been of the truest. "I almost expected a pigtail," observed Francis, looking him affectionately up and down. "But really, why, you've hardly changed at all." "Outwardly not as much, perhaps, as time expects," was the happy reply, "but inwardly." He scanned appreciatively the burly figure of the doctor in his turn. "And I can say the same of you," he declared, still holding his hand tight. "This is a real pleasure, Owen," he went on in his deep voice. "To see you again is a joy to me. Old friends meeting again. There's nothing like it in life, I believe. Nothing." He gave the hand another squeeze before he let it go. "And we," he added, leading the way into a room across the hall, "neither of us is a fugitive from life. We take what we can, I mean." The doctor smiled as he noted the un-English turn of language, and together they entered a sitting room that was, again, more like some inner chamber of a Chinese temple than a back room in a rented Hampstead house. "I only knew 10 minutes ago that you were coming, my dear fellow," the scholar was saying, as his friend gazed round him with increased astonishment. "Or I would have prepared more suitably for your reception. I was out till late. All this," he waved his hand, "surprises you, of course, but the fact is, I have been home some days already, and most of what you see was arranged for me in advance of my arrival. Hence, its apparent completion. I say apparent because actually it is far from faithfully carried out. Yet to exceed," he added, "is as bad as to fall short." The doctor watched him while he listened to a somewhat lengthy explanation of the various articles surrounding them. The speaker, he confirmed his first impression, had changed little during the long interval. The same enthusiasm was in him as before. The same fire and dreaminess alternately in the fine gray eyes, the same humor and passion about the mouth, the same free gestures and the same big voice. Only the lines had deepened on the forehead, and on the fine face the air of thoughtfulness was also deeper. It was Edward Fark, as of old, scholar, poet, dreamer, and enthusiast, despiser of Western civilization, contemptuous of money, generous and upright, a type of value, an individual. "You've done well, done splendidly, Edward, old man," said his friend presently, after hearing of Chinese wonders that took him somewhat beyond his depth, perhaps. "No one is more pleased than I. I've watched your books. You haven't regretted England, I'll be bound?" he asked. "The philosopher has no country, in any case," was the reply, steadily given. "But out there, I confess, I've found my home." He leaned forward, a deeper earnestness in his tone and expression. And into his face, as he spoke, came a glow of happiness. "My heart," he said, "is in China." I see it is," put in the other, conscious that he could not honestly share his friend's enthusiasm. "And you're fortunate to be free to live where your treasure is," he added after a moment's pause. "You must be a happy man. Your passion amounts to nostalgia, I suspect. Already yearning to get back there, probably?" Fark gazed at him for some seconds with shining eyes. "You remember the Persian saying, I'm sure," he said. "You see a man drink, but you do not see his thirst. Well," he added, laughing happily, "you may see me off in 6 months' time, but you will not see my happiness." While he went on talking, the doctor glanced round the room, marveling still at the exquisite taste of everything, the neat arrangement, the perfect matching of form and color. A woman might have done this thing, occurred to him, as the haunting figure shifted deliciously into the foreground of his mind again. The thought of her had been momentarily replaced by all he heard and saw. She now returned, filling him with joy, anticipation, and enthusiasm. Presently, when it was his turn to talk, he would tell his friend about this new, unimagined happiness that had burst upon him like a sunrise. Presently, but not just yet. He remembered, too, with a passing twinge of possible boredom to come, that there must be some delay before his own heart could unburden itself in its turn. Fark wanted to ask some professional questions, of course. He had for the moment forgotten that part of the letter in his general interest and astonishment. "Happiness, yes," he murmured, aware that his thoughts had wandered, and catching at the last word he remembered hearing. "As you said just now in your own queer way, you haven't changed a bit, let me tell you, in your picturesqueness of quotation, Edward. One must not be fugitive from life. One must seize happiness when and where it offers." He said it lightly enough, hugging internally his own sweet secret, but he was a little surprised at the earnestness of his friend's rejoinder. "Both of us, I see," came the deep voice, backed by the flash of the far-seeing gray eyes, "have made some progress in the doctrine of life and death." He paused, gazing at the other with sight that was obviously turned inwards upon his own thoughts. "Beauty," he went on presently, his tone even more serious, "has been my lure. Yours, reality." "You don't flatter either of us, Edward. That's too exclusive a statement," put in the doctor. He was becoming every minute more and more interested in the workings of his friend's mind. Something about the signs offered eluded his understanding. "Explain yourself, old scholar-poet. I'm a dull, practical mind, remember, and can't keep pace with Chinese subtleties." "You've left out beauty," was the quiet rejoinder, "while I left out reality. That's neither Chinese nor subtle. It is simply true." "A bit wholesale, isn't it?" laughed Francis. "A big generalization, rather." A bright light seemed to illuminate the scholar's face. It was as though an inner lamp was suddenly lit. At the same moment the sound of a soft gong floated in from the hall outside, so soft that the actual strokes were not distinguishable in the wave of musical vibration that reached the ear. Fark rose to lead the way in to dinner. "What if I," he whispered, "have combined the two?" and upon his face was a look of joy that reached down into the other's own full heart with its unexpectedness and wonder. It was the last remark in the world he had looked for. He wondered for a moment whether he interpreted it correctly. "By Jove!" he exclaimed. "Edward, what do you mean?" "You shall hear, after dinner," said Fark, his voice mysterious, his eyes still shining with his inner joy. "I told you, I have some questions to ask you, professionally." And they took their seats round an ancient, marvelous table, lit by 2 swinging lamps of soft green jade, while the Chinese servant waited on them with the silent movements and deft neatness of his imperturbable celestial race. This concludes the first part of 2 Total of Chinese Magic by Algernon Blackwood, produced by Best Audiobooks for free.